Okay, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a few minutes. I realize people are still starting to zoom in. As always, my moment of Zoom anxiety. Can someone raise a hand or something to indicate you can hear me? Can people hear me? Okay, thanks. Hey, good to see you. All right, so before we get started with the official proceedings, I want that if we were gathered together in person right now, there's one thing we would do first before the ceremony started, and that's that we'd be having our graduates walk into the physical room that we'd all be in together in a formal procession, and we'd give them all a big round of applause before the proceedings got underway. And can't really do that here. I thought about sticking them all in a Zoom waiting room for a few minutes, but it didn't seem sort of sufficiently dignified for the occasion. So here's what I'd like to ask everyone to do at this point, just as we're getting ready to get started. And let's see if you can follow some classic if-then instructions. Philosophers are notoriously bad at following instructions, but let's see what happens. So if you are not, let me repeat that. If you're not a graduating student, can you please turn your camera off at this time? So turn your camera off if you're not a graduating student, or if you're not me. I'm going to stay here for just a minute longer. But go ahead and unmute yourself so that you can be ready to give them a round of applause in just a minute. So again, if you're not a graduating student, please turn your camera off. If you are a graduating student, and if you're not in a place where it's to do so, could you please turn your camera on? I'm going to turn my camera off also now. So hopefully what we should be seeing, especially if you put your settings so you can only view the people who are sharing their screens, is you should see our graduating students. All right. Now, one more thing then before we get going. I'd like to ask all the graduating students who are on camera right now to please stand up. So. I'm watching you. You're going to hold things up. Okay. All right. Good. All right. And now what I want the students to do, as you may have guessed by this point, is I'd like you to start walking in place a little bit. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to go ahead and have a physical procession. It's just going to be, and some of you are familiar with muralology, it's going to be kind of a scattered object here. So I'd like to ask the graduating students to start marching in place now. I'd like to join me in a round of applause as I welcome the graduating class of both 2020 and 2021. Okay, thank you. So now you're free to do whatever you want with your, sorry, let me, okay, first of many technical glitches probably. Okay, I'm back. So do whatever you want with your camera. I hope people will keep their cameras on now so that we can feel a little bit more like we're all gathered together for this occasion. But I will go ahead and ask everybody to be muted who isn't me at this point. So let me see if I have the ability to make that happen. So I will mute all of you. Okay, so you should all be muted. I should still be unmuted if everything's working. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and officially get started now. Good afternoon, or depending on where you're zooming in from, good morning or good evening. My name is David Boonin. When I always introduce myself, obviously you can see my name on the screen here. We'll try as much as possible to replicate a standard commencement ceremony. Chair of the philosophy department here at CU, and on behalf of my colleagues, it's my pleasure and my privilege to welcome you to today's ceremony, honoring our graduates, not just from this spring, but anyone who came back who would have graduated over the last year and a half or so. I want to start by saying, yeah, it's a very happy day for all of us. It's a beautiful spring day here in Boulder. But at the same time, I wanted to start by saying it didn't seem quite right to just ignore the fact that we're here to participate in a joyful celebration at the end of what has been an extremely difficult year. Last fall, our long colleague Dan Sturgis died suddenly and unexpectedly. He was a popular teacher and citizen of our department. He's sorely missed. Earlier this spring, as I'm sure many of you know, The neighborhood grocery store that's just a few blocks away from where I'm currently seated was the scene of a terrible massacre that really shook many of us. And while the pandemic has affected different people in different ways, and certainly to different degrees, I don't think anyone in our community has really escaped its serious impact. And all of our students were forced to complete their time in our program under extremely challenging circumstances. It feels a little bit strange for me to ask that we begin by observing a moment of silence, given that you're all on mute anyway. But I'm going to go ahead and do that anyhow. So before we get underway with our celebration, I'm going to ask that we observe a moment of silence anyhow, just as a way for us to acknowledge what we've lost over this last year, even as we get ready to celebrate everything we've gained. So just a moment of silence. All right, thank you. So in a few minutes, I'll be, let's see, sorry, I'm gonna get, okay. In a few minutes, I'll be asking my colleague, Graham Forbes, to introduce our commencement speaker, Ann Hunt. And after Dr. Hunt's remarks, we'll move on to the granting of degrees, honors, and awards. But before we get to that, there are two things that I would like to do. First, if you're a parent of one of today's graduates, or a grandparent, aunt, uncle, kindly neighbor, anyone else who has played a supporting role in helping to get that graduate to where they are today, I'd like to ask if possible, if you would turn your camera on. And don't worry, I'm not going to make you stand up and march around. But I would like all the members of the extended family in the broadest sense who help to support our graduates have your camera on at this point. And then if you're anyone else, I'd like to again ask you to turn your camera off for just a moment. But go ahead and unmute yourselves. And so I would like you to join me in giving an expression of our thanks and appreciation, again, for just all the extended family members in the broadest sense of our graduates, and thank them for everything that they did to make it possible for our students to get to this point. So round of applause for all of them, please. Thank you. Okay. And to turning your cameras back on if you want to sort of join us and be here. Okay, and then the second thing I need to do, and I'll try to be fairly brief before I hand things over to Graham Forbes to introduce our speaker, is I want to try to give you a brief answer to the question that many of you are probably asking yourselves right about now. So, what good is a philosophy degree? Philosophers commonly distinguish between things that are good as a means to some further end, and intrinsic goods, things that are good as an end in of themselves. If a philosophy degree is really good, then there ought to be some kind of argument to show that it's good in one or the other of these senses. Let me start with the claim that a philosophy degree is good in the instrumental sense. It's good for you because it's something else that's good. This is a very common claim, or at least it's a very common claim among those whose job it is to try to get people to sign up for philosophy classes. I'm just going to address here what I think is the most popular version of this argument. This is the one that claims that the study of philosophy leads to a certain kind of mental tranquility. So the philosopher on this account is like the wise old sage sitting at the top of the mountain in a New Yorker cartoon. And the study of philosophy is good on this account because it helps you achieve this level of inner peace and contentment that we associate with this transcendent figure. It's a nice idea, but it runs counter to virtually everything that I've experienced as a philosopher. One reason philosophy isn't particularly good as a source of tranquility has to do with the subject matter of philosophy. The questions that philosophers seek to answer are hard. What is knowledge? What is real? What am I? How should I live? It isn't just that it's hard to find the right answers to these questions. It's that it's hard to know how we could tell if we had found the right answers. Sometimes it's even hard to believe that these questions have right answers at all, and yet at the same time, it's even harder to believe that they don't. The very subject matter with which philosophers work then can induce a kind of intellectual vertigo that is incompatible with the goal of mental tranquility. A second reason that philosophy is not particularly good for instilling mental tranquility has to do with what I would call the culture of philosophy. It's a bit difficult to describe to an outsider, but let's just say it isn't exactly touchy-feely. A number of years ago, I was invited to join an interdisciplinary reading group where faculty from a wide range of departments got together to read and discuss books of mutual interest. Whenever anyone made a comment during our discussions, people from the other departments would respond by saying things like, "I really appreciate what you're saying," or "That's a really good point," or "I really hear you." I would respond by saying things like, "That doesn't follow," or "That's inconsistent," or "Here's a counterexample." For some reason, I didn't get invited back the following year. A third reason that philosophy isn't good for instilling mental tranquility in those who pursue it has to do with the method of philosophy. Like Socrates, our founding father, we philosophers commit ourselves to following the argument wherever it takes us, even if it leads to conclusions we really do not wish to believe. When we think about whether free will exists, whether in principle our minds could survive the deaths of our bodies, whether our world really could contain a God that is both omnipotent and morally perfect, or whether the lives that most of us lead are fundamentally immoral, we philosophers are sometimes led to conclusions that are disturbing and even depressing. Even worse, we come up with arguments for these conclusions. And sometimes these arguments are not at all easy to overcome. For those who take philosophical argumentation seriously, this too can be a source not of mental tranquility, but of its opposite. Well, what then about the claim that studying philosophy is intrinsically good? This amounts to the claim that one should study philosophy for its own sake, even if doing so produces no further rewards. This position has a long and distinguished tradition. Socrates is famous for having claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Aristotle argued that the most excellent human life is that of philosophical contemplation. Mill, in a passage that I suspect all of our majors have studied at one point or another, maintained that it would be better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. All of these views in one way or another come down to the claim that the careful study of philosophy makes a human life a better life, not better at producing some further good, but just better, just good. But while one can produce a long list of distinguished thinkers who have held this view, I find that there is something rather suspicious about the list. They are all philosophers. I've never seen an economist or an engineer, a physicist or a chemist, an anthropologist or a sociologist argue that the best human life is one that involves dispassionately contemplating relations between the various axioms in different systems of modal logic. And I'm inclined to think that if you surveyed airline pilots or soldiers, painters or dancers, physicians or accountants, you'd probably get a very different picture of the kind of life that is worth living. Few, if any of them, I suspect, would take you up on the offer to spend their lives meditating on abstract, eternal, a priori truths. Even fewer, I think, would go along with such a plan once you explained that doing so was supposed to be, quote, its own reward. So where does this leave us? And more importantly, where does this leave our poor students? Fortunately, there's a third alternative. For there is another, if less frequently noted, sense in which we use the term good. This is the sense in which something can be a good instance of the kind of thing that it is. The official distance of a marathon, for example, is 26 miles and 385 yards. It may be that there's nothing intrinsically good about running this particular distance, and no instrumental good to be achieved by aiming at just rather than at some other. Still, given that there are marathon runners, it seems reasonable to say that some people are good marathon runners and other people are not, and that if you're going to be a marathon runner, you ought to strive to be a good one rather than a bad one. It's this third sense of the word good, I think, that holds the key to answering the question that most of the parents gathered here today probably asked their children on that fateful day when they declared their major. Here's why. When our students decided to major in philosophy, they were not at that time deciding to become philosophers. In the most important sense, our students had already become philosophers when they first found themselves in the grip of a compulsion to think about the sort that we discuss in the classes that we teach. Their question then was not, should I be a philosopher or something else, but rather, should I be a good philosopher or a bad philosopher? By exposing them to a broad range of philosophical works and a variety of techniques for understanding and critically evaluating them, the faculty of the philosophy department at CU Boulder have helped these students to become good philosophers. It's difficult to do philosophy well. It's admirable when people with philosophical inclinations aspire to do it well rather than poorly. And this, in the end, is why I think that what our students have done in their studies is good, and why their achievement is deserving of our respect, our admiration, and our celebration on this special day. And I'm now pleased to introduce our recently retired colleague, Graham Forbes, who I hope is here, who will be introducing today's commencement speaker. So Graham, if you're here, can you unmute? This is a Zoom commencement. Let's see. I'm going to double check the list of participants. Thanks for your patience.
He's here. He's here. We just can't hear him.
Unmute himself.
Let's see. So hi, Graham. It sounds like you're here. It looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Anyone with more text want to make any suggestions about how to proceed?
Click the little caret to the right of the mute icon.
For Graham?
Then, yeah, for Graham. And then click test speaker and microphone.
I'm not seeing that.
You don't see that.
You need to turn your volume on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, okay, it was set. I ran a test earlier and it didn't reset to the built-in microphone. But if I'm audible now?
Can you tell this is a philosophy commencement ceremony? Yes, okay.
Well, I don't think many people know I had the very good sense to retire just before I would have had to teach large groups on Zoom, so I have no skill at all at using Zoom except 1.1 or 1.2. So something like that was predictable. But you're all hearing me now, yeah?
Yes, and we're happy to see you. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Anne Hunt as our speaker today. I've known Dr. Hunt since she was an undergraduate at Tulane, where she worked with me, took some courses with me, and then she did a master's with me before moving on to Virginia to do her PhD. She didn't go into academia, as you'll know if you've seen the program. She has worked most of her or all of her career in various companies as a software engineer. Among America's biggest companies like Boeing and Microsoft, but primarily with smaller startups. And currently she's working with Realtor Incorporated, where she heads a large team of engineers and data scientists trying to put artificial intelligence into the process of buying and selling houses, which is an area where she thinks there's room for lots of improvement as far as intelligent decision making is made. She also works as a consultant to another company called Clearbrief, which specializes in much what the name sounds like. It's using natural language computational semantics to help lawyers write clearly, to write briefs clearly. This, of course, when a philosopher hears this, what you immediately think of are all the philosophers and types of philosophy, where writing clearly would be a start. For example, suppose you wanted to understand postmodernism. I mean, why? But just suppose, we're good at hypotheticals, suppose you wanted to understand it, then I feel that some variant of what Anne's doing right now could be distributed to the postmodernists, and they could write their works in ways that we, the rest of us, could understand. And when we wanted to understand postmodernism, there would be an app for that. That idea is mine, Anne. Should you pursue it and it turns out to be an international bestseller, I want my cut. At any rate, here is for her to give her commencement address, Dr. Anne Hunt.
Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Just a thumbs up from one or two people. Great. It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you, Dr. Forbes. I really appreciate that introduction. About 40 years ago, I stood in front of a room full of people and gave a different commencement speech. It was both like and unlike this one. It was in person rather than virtual, of course. It was high school graduates in a small country town rather than college graduates in a sophisticated city. But it was the same in that every commencement can be viewed as a crossroads, as a time when you were expected to begin something. Ready or not, you've got to start. To some, that brings hope and excitement. To others, it brings anxiety and stress. I chose to start my address that day by reciting this poem by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and knowing I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood, and peered down one as long as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then I took the other as just as fair, but having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Oh, I saved the first for another day, but knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I would ever come back. Even I, born and raised in a small town in East Texas, recognize this poem for the old chestnut that it is. Still, I found it compelling. Chestnuts encapsulate truths. My life changed substantially after that night, and I've indeed never been back. Something a little more modern, 13 Moons, a novel by Charles Frazier, goes a step farther. He wrote, "The trail ahead forked at a big poplar tree, offering simple choices, left or right. But I knew even then that you could not just set out in one direction and necessarily get somewhere." And to me, this is the crux of the anxiety. Not only might you not ever come back, you might in fact get nowhere at all. That fear of getting nowhere means we want to plan, to strategize. Well-meaning friends, family, they all exhort us to think of our future. Heraclitus said something like, "Into the same rivers we step and do not step." Loosely interpreted, you can't step into the same river twice. And although this particular ceremony marks a passage that we find important in our culture, every moment is in fact equally unrepeatable. In effect, he simply acknowledged our way of being in the world. With this change from student to graduate, the feeling of moving on is likely to be especially acute, but every day your choices will change you. I see myself today as a time traveler, like I am stepping back into a river that's both different and the same. I'm returning to this commencement from that earlier one, myself, but from the past. Now a changed person, or maybe even a completely different person than I was then. And as all such stories go, I'm finding that it is my duty as a time traveler to deliver an important message. Not too long ago, a stunning young person named Amanda Gorman delivered this message to all of us at the presidential inauguration. She said, "The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." That resonated. We went through a dark time, and I can't deny that it looks like we're still in the dark. The pandemic appears to be waning on our continent while still raging around the world. Racism has been named as the blight that it is in our society, but it too appears to rage on. It's clear to anyone who reads that we have well and truly screwed the climate. Only desperate measures will make any kind of impact. And on top of that, we have filled our oceans with plastic, and we show little signs of slowing down. So yes, I want to be brave enough to be the light. The question I had 40 years ago is the one I'll address today. How? What if I make my choice and it leads nowhere? What if I can't find the courage, or I make a mistake, or I just generally screw it up by taking the wrong choice at this crossroads? What I'm going to offer you here today is going to seem mundane. And of course, you don't need to believe me. Even hearing me out is optional. This whole ceremony, by the way, is also optional. But if you have decided to be here and you've decided to listen, then maybe take one more step. I ask myself, what sort of advice would I have listened to decades ago? I'm not sure. The only advice I seemed to get back then was about making a long-term plan, deciding what I wanted to be someday. and being sure I did something where I could support myself. This last was sort of good advice, especially in those days when women I knew dropped out and had someone else pay the bills and often regretted it later. But I couldn't see the long term, and I didn't think I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I had no idea what other options there were. So maybe some of this sounds familiar to you or has a similarity to your current situation, standing as you do at what looks like a crossroads. People are telling you to dream big. The idea is that you give up today in favor of tomorrow, or 20 years from now, or 30, or 50, or maybe even after death. I'm going to offer a different idea, maybe even the opposite of that. 3 years ago, I decided to start running. I'm not a runner or a big athlete or anything like that. I'm just your average Joe. Before that, I hit the gym now and then. But I tried something new 3 years ago, running every day, every single day, rain or shine. I was terrible at running, and if I ran for more than a couple of minutes, I was out of breath and uncomfortable. So I started by running for 10 minutes every day. I didn't push myself. I could run as slowly as I wanted. The only rule was run first thing in the morning, every morning before eating or anything else. Run slow, run fast, run short, run long, just run. So without any plan to become a runner and with no big dreams to run marathons, I nevertheless run more today than almost anyone else I know. But still, how to be a light or anything else. A woman who thought herself wise once told me when she heard I was going for a PhD in philosophy, that and a nickel will get you a cup of coffee. From what I regularly heard in those days, that was pretty much a consensus. Did I have a plan? In fact, I did not. At that time, I simply could not bring myself to make a plan about what I would do in a year, much less 5, 10, or more. So instead of envisioning myself as something that I would be someday, I took what might be described as a twist on the greedy strategy. That's a strategy where at each choice point, you take the best of the immediately available options. A critical aspect of this strategy is how you evaluate what best means. For me, what is best is what seems right. That is, what creates value for others and for myself based on the outcome that I can actually foresee. And this has worked out a lot better than it would have if I had tried to imagine the far future. For one thing, I could not have planned to become someone who would lead teams building artificially intelligent systems. That would have just seemed like science fiction at the time. So in fact, planning for the future would have probably ended up preventing me from ever being able to do what it turns out I love doing. What sorts of things could you do in 40 or 50 years that are inconceivable to you today as anything other than science fiction? And how could you ever plan for them? Each year in undergraduate, I signed up for classes that interested me and where the ratio of hard work to reward of understanding wasn't too high. For me, those turned out to be mainly math and philosophy. 4 years in, I found myself getting close to getting both degrees, so I did. And then I signed up for a graduate program that interested me. For me, that turned out to be philosophy. A few years farther in, wise folks' voices turned into sort of a chorus of alarm. What would I do to earn money? And yet I persisted in my strategy. It did worry me. It seemed to me then that everyone else had a long-term plan, one they were just all too willing to brag about at parties. I stayed a bit quiet at those parties and just kept working away on my near-term goals. And during that time, I also had to work on this side. And that's how I started developing an iterative approach to work. I'm not dismissing my privileged position at all. I did have parents who paid for most of my tuition, but I still had to have many jobs outside of school. Secretary, office temp, bartender, even a bit of house cleaning, and an ill-fated attempt to sell vacuum cleaners door to door. Along with tutoring undergraduates who seemed to have endless supplies of cash, accompanied by difficulties understanding philosophy, or really any texts at all in some cases. I had almost a year in a major investment bank. I worked in an antiques auction house, just to name a few. These early experiences were not just about making money. They were ways to understand how to offer value in the world and to do it in a way where you keep value for yourself as well. Your integrity, your balance. They were a way to move past that simple and probably false idea that you could or should make money by pursuing your passion. I think that's true for some small percentage of us. But for me at 17 or 20 or 30, I didn't even know what counted as a passion, much less what my passion was or would be in the future. Larry Cornett, a really good career coach I worked with, once said, "Are you sure you want to take something you love and force it to pay the bills?" Follow your passion might be the worst advice you'll ever get. And yet, I did manage to find a job I love. And as it turns out, I am passionate about my work, but I didn't follow any inborn passion, and I didn't follow a long-term plan. The main thing all these jobs started to teach me was that there isn't some big choice where you can screw up, despite what it looks like sometimes, especially at commencements. Instead, there are lots of choices and lots of opportunities not to screw up. The biggest turning point in all of this came for me when I finally managed to wrest my doctorate from a bunch of surly old white men who seemed to give it up out of exhaustion and a fear that I would never leave them alone, but would continue to write hundreds of dense pages for them to read. Granting the degree was the only way they could make me stop, so they did. There didn't appear to be lots of jobs for philosophers. It turned out the chorus was at least partly right. I didn't see a bunch of philosophers wanted ads in the paper. Nevertheless, I found a job opening advertised in Austin, a place looking for PhDs with the talent and logic. I applied, I heard nothing. So a couple of weeks later, I called and mentioned I'd be in the neighborhood of their office the next week. They said, "In that case, come in for an interview." So I bought plane tickets, rented a car, and traveled across the country. After lots of first order logic on the whiteboard, I got a job as a logician working in an early AI system for DARPA. A year later, I was recruited to an AI-based, top-tier funded startup in the Valley, and I was a senior director of engineering and AI there by a few years later. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't end up in academia. For me, it wouldn't have been a good fit. But I didn't feel boxed in, even though a lot of people said the only position open to me would be teaching, and that would have been a huge stretch for me. So going back now to fictional forks and allegorical roads, Lewis Carroll wrote, "One day Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. 'Which road do I take?' she asked. 'Where do you want to go?' was his response. 'I don't know,' Alice answered. 'Then,' said the cat, 'it doesn't matter.' Some of us here today feel confident we know where we want to go. But if you today are like I was 40 or 30 or 20 years ago, you're a bit more like Alice. And this turns out not to be as big of a problem as you might imagine. One thing I learned in technology is that you don't just design some perfect big idea of a product, spend a year building it, and then release it to universal acclaim. Instead, we do something called discovery and something else called iterative development. This is what we call the agile approach, and it turns out it works pretty well in life too. That's because chance intervenes. And even if it didn't, as humans, we aren't great at predicting what we or anyone else will like and find valuable, especially decades later. As a woman with ambiguous ethnicity working in the tech world, I found that a certain agility in jumping from stone to stone kept the river at bay. Back then, if you couldn't find a way to pass for a straight white man under the age of about 30, it could be tricky to get a promotion or even to get hired in the first place. And lots of places that people thought were great places to work turned out to be great for a standard sort of tech bro and not so great for anyone else. Things are a little better now, a little. You might be asking, what does a philosopher do at work? I noted that when I started out, logic was a skill sought after in certain circles, mostly AI research, and it still is. From there, what this philosopher did was to use that plus the uniquely philosophical ability to understand and describe complex systems. This is a skill that's also still in hot demand. I could help small and later big and now really big teams figure out what needs to be built, how to get organized to build it, and how to fix it when it breaks. And teaching comes in handy too. Now that a substantial amount of my time is invested up in bringing up the latest generation of builders, the best of whom are, in my opinion, philosophers, at least in practice. You could still be convinced that long-term planning would have yielded a better career or a better life. Couldn't a greedy strategy get you nothing more than a life of day drinking, social media surfing, and eating chips out of a bag? It could. And so let me go back and emphasize the twist on this strategy that I mentioned before. Let's take running again as an example. I go running every morning because I enjoy it, and I enjoy it because I do it every day. At many points along the way, there was a choice. In fact, there's a new choice each morning. So each day, I do the amount and type of running that is most enjoyable that day. I choose to do that because I believe it will make that day better, not because I think in a year I'll be in better shape. And I chose to study philosophy not because I believed one day I'd get a fantastic job in tech. Rather, I knew that studying, while difficult, is enjoyable each day that day if you're studying something you love. And during that very day, it's a better day than I would have had if I were looking at Facebook. So greedy, yes, but greedy for feeling good, not for being easy. There's a difference, and it might still be a puzzle, of course, but I think you probably know what I mean. I'll start my conclusion with a few words from Dylan Thomas. He wrote, "In my craft or sullen art, exercised in the still night, when only the moon rages and lovers lie abed, with their griefs in their arms, I labor by the singing light, not for ambition or bread, or the strut and trade of charms on the ivory stages, but for the common wages of their most secret heart." So, as you all stand here in front of diverging roads, where the simple choices appear to be anything but simple, I recommend that you recognize the connection, the thread or river that binds today to tomorrow, to someday 40 years from now. You'll want to choose wisely, but don't be fearful if you can't see ahead. None of us can. We imagine that our plan matters, our strategy. For some of us, that might be true, but it hasn't been true for me. Each choice matters, but the long-term outcome turned out to be one I couldn't have imagined. I'd suggest you live today so it is the best day it can be. Celebrate, love your friends, love your family, love the uncertainty itself. It will be the same tomorrow, and yet, in fact, it will never be the same again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hunt. And please join me, audio clap, visual clap, whatever you want, but thank you so much. And I think all of our graduates who have no long-term plans are breathing a big sigh of relief right now, and probably even those who have no short-term plans too. So that was excellent. Okay, so at this point, I'm very happy to turn things over to my colleague, Garrett Bredesen, who is our Director of Undergraduate Studies. He's going to oversee the awarding of the undergraduate degrees. And so graduates, those of you who are present here, undergraduates who are in a graduating class, you know, again, if we were able to do this in person, he'd hand you your diploma, he'd shake your hand. We'd all have a chance to see each graduate one at a time. Obviously, we can't do it that way here, but what I'm going to ask Garrett to do, maybe he'll say a few brief words about what's involved in successfully completing the major in our department. But either way, I'm going to ask him to read through our list of graduates. And if you are one of the undergraduates who graduated this term or in one of the previous terms that we're recognizing here today, and if you're present, when he reads your name, please go ahead and unmute yourself, and you know, so we can get you on the screen for a moment and we can all recognize you, and just, you know, tell us where you're from, where you're zooming in from right now. And if you want to stay on a few seconds longer, maybe tell us who your favorite philosopher is, or maybe favorite philosophical work. So we can recognize those of the graduates who are present here. And I guess I'll also just say before I hand things over to Garrett, I mean, when we do these things in person, I think we sort of say, you know, please hold your applause until all the degrees have been, you know, awarded. And it's always kind of fruitless anyhow. You can't really prevent people from whooping and so forth. But I guess I'll just say, like, you know, if for those of the graduates who are here and Garrett reads your name and then you pop up on the screen and you say hi for a moment, you know, I don't have the heart to tell parents to like hold your applause until the end. So post something in the chat, little emoji, woohoo, whatever. I think that's more than fine. And then we'll move on to the rest of the program. Garrett, I'll hand things off to you now.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you, Anne, for the address. That was wonderful. So let me start with the practical side of things. We have quite a few names because we have 2 years of graduates here. I'm well aware that we don't have that many people here who graduated last year. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you could, if you're here and you're present at the ceremony, and if you graduated in fall of 2019 or spring of 2020 or summer of 2020, if you're there, would you please just drop your name in the chat for me so I'll know? I'm going to pause after every name, but if I know that you're here, I'll be able to pause a little bit longer so I can kind of balance being efficient with the names with also actually being able to acknowledge the people who are here. And yeah, as David said, if you just let us know, Zoom will find you so we can all acknowledge you as long as you say something. So yeah, tell us where you're from. If you want to give a shout out to somebody, at minimum, thank your mom, right? If it was me, I'd, Garrett Bredesen, and then I'd unmute myself and I'd say, I'm Garrett, I'm from Beloit, Wisconsin. Thanks to my mom for being dope. And thanks to Colin Smith for teaching me that, Parmenides said all the true things so we don't have to. Anyway, something like that. Whatever you want to say is fine. But we just want the camera to get on you for a second so we can all acknowledge you. Usually I do say something a little bit about what it means to get a philosophy degree. But actually, if it's okay, I just want to say something a little bit different this year. This is maybe something that you haven't thought as much about, but it's something that I was actually thinking about this morning. Look, we've all been really isolated this year. That's one of the big things that I think I'll remember and have nightmares about for years and years. And I know that this has been particularly isolating, for college students. It's also been isolating for faculty. And for many of us, I know this is true for me, for many of us, you guys in our classes have kind of been our only companions or almost our only companions really for the last year and a half. And I just want to thank, just personally, I want to thank everybody for being the kind of companions that they were in this really difficult time. So I don't know. I mean, that's all I really have to say here. Congratulations for, making it through this bizarre time and earning your degree. I don't think I could have done it as an undergraduate, honestly. So I have undying respect for everybody whose name that I'm about to read here. Okay, so again, last reminder, if you're on the list from fall 2019, and you can check the program if you want to see, it's in the chat there. If you're on the list from fall 2019 or spring 2020 or summer 2020, just drop me a quick line. You can just drop your name or your last name in the chat, and I'll know to pause a little bit after I read your name. Okay. So beginning then with fall 2019. Josh Albert, Brendan Bunker, David Connor, Kaylin Sarnecki, Connor Drips, Andrew Keene, Megan LaLittle, Rosa Lawrence, Chandler Padilla, Tara Ritchie, Hugh Ronald, Sam Schiff, Charlie Schmidt, Skylar Schwartz, Christopher Smith, and Alicia Stockhold. Boy, even going back to those names, it seems like so long ago with this pandemic going on. Moving on then to spring 2020. Alexander Argente, Oliver Ash, Benjamin Ausbrooks, Corey Brixey, Sarah Bustamante, Amy Cho, graduating magna cum laude, Andrew DeRose, Thomas Dolan, Mimi Eshelman, Julia Fontana, graduating magna cum laude, Justin Greer, Kaylee Halloran, Cole Harner, Annie Hubbard, graduating magna cum laude, Catherine Hughes, graduating summa cum laude, Alejandro Irizarry, Eric Jensen, Thomas Luscombe, Teresa Mankiewicz, Alec Robinson, Alex Rosenthal, Angelique Saylor, Kart Schwartz, Michael Sina, Thomas Smith, Jada Taylor.
That's me. I'm here.
Hey, Jada, congratulations.
I'm in Denver right now, and I do want to thank my mom, actually.
Awesome, thanks. Stephen Troy graduated summa cum laude. Myra Velasco, Porter Verfurth, Devin Viert, Tori Walker, and Allison Weinberger, who graduated summa cum laude.
I'm here, and thanks to my mom for being dope.
Thanks, Allison. Well thought out, well put. I couldn't have put it any better myself. All right.
Sorry, but I may have to report Allison to the honor code. I believe that was an unattributed presentation of her work as someone else. But anyway, sorry.
That's right. That's right. It's not too late to get the honor council on you guys. All right. All right. Summer 2020. Ali Al-Maroon, Grayson Arndt, Alexander Beal, Kieran Britt, who graduated summa cum laude.
Hi, I'm here. I'm Kieran. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, but born and raised in Littleton, Colorado. And I'd just like to thank my parents and the wonderful people in the philosophy department, especially my three mentors, Graham Forbes, Graham Audie, and Matthias Stoip, for all you've taught me over the years.
Thanks, Kieran. Continuing with summer 2020, Adam Gonzalez, Emily Harris, Brian Lieberg, Solomon Silver, and Eason Zucker. All right, moving on then to this year's graduates. We'll begin with fall 2020 graduates. If you're here from fall 2020, will you do the same thing that I just asked people to do? Will you drop your name in the chat so that I know that you're here? I'm assuming we'll have some more people from spring 2021, but I just want a little bit of a heads up if you're from fall 2020 and graduating. Just drop your name in the chat for me and I'll know that you're here. All right, BAs awarded fall 2020. Alexander Brack, Landon Chentz, Justin Ho, Adam Ishay, Charlotte Moore, Kareem Sakal, Kai Seymour, Gaujian Song, Chad Stacy, Cooper Thompson, and Alec Tiger, who graduated summa cum laude. All right, moving then on to spring 2021. I'm going to take a little bit more time in between names here because I know that there's a few more people here from this spring. So again, please, after I say your name, just unmute yourself and jump in and say something, thank somebody, or thank Descartes for being right too. Sorry, all these rationalists are right. Spring 2021 names now. Austin Adams, Nama Alnima, Sarah Altschuler, graduated summa cum laude.
Hi, I just wanted to thank my parents and my grandmother for being here and just supporting me through school. I wanted to say a special thank you to Professor Philippe and also Brian Talbot for helping me with my thesis and keeping me sane over the course of Zoom, and also to the entire philosophy department for just opening up this wonderful world where I was stuck in political science, and you guys let me kind of think in a broader way, and it's been wonderful, so thank you.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Sarah. Glad that we could deliver you from evil. Next, Carrie Alvarez. Dylan Anderson, magna cum laude.
I'm here. I'm Dylan. I'm from Tularosa, New Mexico. And I'd like to thank all of the professors in the philosophy department, especially Brian Talbot for overseeing my thesis as well, and my friend John Green for being here.
Great, thanks, Dylan. Congratulations. Next, Julia Bocabella.
Hi. I'm Julia from Chicago, and I just want to say thank you to my parents and thank you to everyone in the philosophy department. You guys were all so amazing. I had the best 4 years. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, congratulations. All right. Moving on. Tanner Kavanaugh. Hillary Cook. John Augustine Mudd. Ben Deitch. Natosha Edmonds. Brianna Farrell. Kaylee Freed. Noah Galinkin.
Yeah, I'd like to thank my parents and also all the awesome professors I had, especially Colin Smith and Andrew Chapman, who are super hype dudes. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Noah. Spencer Garcia.
Hi, my name is Spencer. I'm currently zooming in from a makeshift location in Vail, Colorado as a part of a graduation trip that my parents and I and some family friends are on. So I apologize if you hear any screaming in the background. We are in the pool area. So this is very telling of the times we're in, and got to make do, I guess. But I want to thank the entire philosophy department, of course, especially Garrett. Really was patient with me throughout this year. I was going to do an honors thesis, decided not to. He was going to be my mentor. And then he was gracious enough to write a letter of recommendation for me for law school. So went above and beyond, and I really appreciate it, Garrett. Thank you to the philosophy department as well.
Thank you, Spencer. Sounds like you're living a tough life there. Great. Adam,
sorry, I just want to know, is Spencer in the pool right now? I just want to get
I'm not, but I'm tempted.
You're very close. Okay. Well, so there's some advantages to these Zoom ceremonies. Okay, sorry, I continue, Garrett.
You're jumping in the pool with your gown. This is going to be an Instagrammable moment here, Spencer. Yeah. All right. Moving on then. Adam Gonzalez. Patrick Heffernan.
Hi, yeah. I'd like to thank my parents. They're the best. And I'd also like to thank everyone in the philosophy department, especially those that have instilled my passion for bioethics and environmental ethics. I'll be pursuing a PhD in disease ecology in the fall at Notre Dame. And I'm very excited to include a bioethical component in my research. So thank you guys for that. And thank you for being an awesome department.
Thank you, Patrick. Xavier Jackson. Freddie Jacobs. Juliana Lane. Grace Livingston, magna cum laude. Tiana Mills. Nicholas Morgan. Forrest Munger. Zach Northam. Matthew Perrone. Agrima Rai.
Hi, I'm logging in from New Delhi, India, and I've had a great time in the philosophy department, and I just want to thank my parents and all my friends and all the philosophy teachers who instilled the passion of philosophy in me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Agrima. Cornelia Rubinson. Molly Sarasp. Lauren Schultz. John Stokes. Michael Taylor. Phoenix Taylor Carter.
The people I have to thank is longer than I would ever have time for, including many of the professors here. But of course, my mom will always be at the top of that list. Thank you.
Yay, Phoenix.
Thanks, Phoenix. Henry Wong. Kristen Zachman.
I'm here. I'm zooming in from Boulder. I'm really grateful to the philosophy department, specifically Graham Odie, who wrote me a recommendation letter, helped me get into the University of Madison or Wisconsin at Madison. So yeah, thanks guys.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. You're going to a great state. Great state. We're almost done then. Summer 2021 is our final 5 people. Chantel Dahl.
I'm here. I have a wonderful network of friends and family. I came in as a transfer student, so I didn't get to take classes from every professor in the department, but the ones that I had were lovely. Special shout out to you, Garrett, for allowing me to take an obscene amount of credits, and instead of telling me no, you asked, how can I help? And I really appreciate that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Chantel. Congratulations. Cameron Fragoso. Kelsey Grant. Connor Mulkin. And finally, Corey Sherman. And maybe take another moment to congratulate everybody who graduated in this difficult time.
Thanks, Garrett. Next I'd like to introduce our colleague Iskra Faleva, who oversees the honors program within our department. And as you probably already noticed at this point, we had some students who graduated with wrote theses. So I'm just going to ask Iskra to read through the names of the students who wrote theses. And if you're a student here who wrote a thesis, again, if you can unmute and chat for a minute. And if you want to thank more people, that's fine. But also, if you want to take a few moments to very briefly describe what your thesis was about, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 sentences worth of just sort of this was what it was about, that would be terrific too. So Iskra, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So I first want to start by thanking Garrett Bredesen and Brian Talbot, who are the most popular honors thesis advisors in the department. And between the two of them, more than 2/3 of the students are, writing a thesis with either one of them or the other. I don't know what you do to attract all these students. And I have to say that anytime a student mentions one of your names, I think, oh no, they already have too much work, but you always somehow say yes. So I don't discourage them. So we had 4 students who graduated with honors this spring and 1 who graduated with honors in the fall. Of these 5 people, there are 2 who are currently here, but maybe I will mention all 5. So Alec Tiger, who graduated in the fall, got summa cum laude, writing on liberalism, with Garrett Bredesen. And then we had a student named Gwendolyn Ropke, who was actually distributed studies major, but she wrote a philosophy honors thesis, combining philosophy, existentialism specifically with psychology and astrophysics, an interdisciplinary thesis. And she got magna cum laude for her thesis, working with my colleague Jumi Wingo. And then we have Grace Livingston, who wrote a very interesting thesis on Epictetus's philosophy and Epictetus's way of life. She worked with my colleague Jason Potter. And then the 2 students who are here are Dylan Small, who wrote a very interesting thesis on disinformation, combining sort of methods from philosophy and mathematics. And maybe Dylan can say a little bit more about his thesis. He worked with my colleague Brian Talbot.
Yeah, so I'm Dylan. My thesis was about polarizing disinformation and trying to figure out a way that we can detect it, and sort of an argument about what discovering a method of detecting it would have on the First Amendment.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Congratulations. It was very original. And then we also have Sarah Altschuler, who wrote a very sort of timely thesis on whether sex work should be legal. And she also worked with my colleague, Brian Talbot. Sarah.
Yeah, so I'm a double major with political science as well as philosophy. And so many of the things that I take interest in kind of have an intersectionality regarding those. And there was something so interesting about some of the writings and readings that I've read about sex work and these kind of conceptions of feminism that I found troubling, and yet something about like the nature of sex work that was just so compelling to me, and I wanted to explore it. And so I wrote my thesis about the moral and political options around sex work and arrived that legalization was the best route. It was just so much fun. And as Professor Talbot predicted, as soon as I published it, I wished I could have worked on it way more. So I just look forward to exploring similar interests like that.
Congratulations. That's great to hear.
Congratulations. So these were our honor students.
Great, thank you so much. So before we get to our graduate students who are graduating, we have a few undergraduate prizes to confer/announce. So Garrett, if your cat is going to stop giving you grief for a moment, I'll turn things back to Garrett, and then, oh, sorry, and we'll sort of do the same thing. We got some names to read. If any of the students are here, I hope that they'll unmute and say something so that we can congratulate them, and then we'll move on to the graduate students. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes, apparently I'll be co-presenting with Greta the cat. We'll see. I think I've disabused her of the notion that she has a role to play further in the ceremony. Anyway, I just have a few awards to present here. Again, I think I know kind of who's here from the previous portion, but definitely if you're here, please at least say thank you so that you can get the screen on you. Maybe tell us like what class you wrote the paper for these paper awards. I don't know, come up with something. So undergraduate awards. First, so I'm going to give the awards that we presented this year, as well as awards that were presented last year as well, which we didn't get a chance to recognize, of course, at the ceremony. So for the first award is the Undergraduate History of Philosophy Award, which is for the best paper written each year by one of our undergraduates in the area of history of philosophy, broadly construed. And so the 2020 winner is Alison Weinberger, and her paper is titled Correlation, Not Causation, Understanding the Scope of Aristotle's Teleology in Light of Physics 2.8. A title which really warms the heart of any good historian of philosophy. Alison?
Hi, yeah. I wrote this paper for Mitzi Lee's Aristotle class. It's a great class, and thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alison. Usually I would have a certificate to hand you now, but it's probably not a big loss not to get that actual certificate. Let's see, the 2021 winner, this year's winner for the same prize in the history of philosophy is Rose Scotty Burrows for her paper, A Modern Allegory of the Cave, Social Media and Misinformation. Rose, I'm not sure if you're here or not, but if so, say something.
I'm here.
Oh, good.
I'm going to say that I owe this prize, as well as my current imposter syndrome, to Colin Smith. So thank you so much. You're a really great teacher for the fall 2019 semester, and I would not have had any other teacher for that course. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Congratulations, Rose. Someday we'll get somebody who didn't write on Ancient one of these prizes. Someday, some fine day. All right. Next is the Socrates Award. The Socrates Award is pretty straightforward. It's the award that we give out every year to our graduating senior or seniors with the highest overall GPA at the time that they graduate. So we have 3 award winners from 2020 who I'd like to recognize first. First of all, Kieran Britt.
Hi again. Thank you for the award.
Thanks, Kieran. Next, also from 2020, Stephen Troy. Not sure if Stephen's here today. Also from 2020, Allison Weinberger.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. She's like, I've said all I can say. Don't make me say more words. Congratulations. From 2021, I'm not sure if either of our 2021 winners are here today, but I'd like to announce them nevertheless. Ben Deitch and Charlotte Moore. Okay, then our scholarship winners, our scholarships are really the biggest prizes in some way in the department. They certainly come with the most cash. We have the Morris Judd Scholarship is named after a former philosophy professor here who was fired in the 1950s on allegedly having ties to the Communist Party, and there's a legacy set up in his name. The winner of the Morris Judd Scholarship for this academic year was Kelsey Grant. I'm not sure that Kelsey is here. And then I can also announce that the winner of the Morris Judd Scholarship for next academic year is Ian Gaskins. Ian, are you here? I'm not sure. All right, and then finally, two last scholarships to announce. Likewise, for this year, the Paduano Family Scholarship, and we thank the Paduano family for their generosity. The Paduano Family Scholarship for this year was won by Charles Doramew. I'm not sure if Charles is here, but if you are, say something. And then the Paduano Family Scholarship for next academic year has just been awarded to Rose Scotty Burrows once again.
And once again, I have to thank Colin Smith because he wrote my letter of recommendation. And yeah, I mean, just comparing these past couple years, it makes a world of difference to have someone believing in you like Colin. So I owe both of these awards to him, and I'm very, very thankful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Congratulations. Both these awards very well earned. All right. That's all I've got. Yeah, that's all I've got for undergrad awards.
Thanks, Garrett. So I'll hand things over to our colleague Mitzi Lee to do the graduate students in just a second. But two quick comments. First, I can't believe Spencer isn't in the pool yet. I just wanted to register him a little bit impressed by that. And second, I think I'm just going to make an executive decision here as chair of the department because Garrett mentioned that these ancient philosophy papers keep winning the History of Philosophy Prize. So I'm just going to declare Derek Parfit has been dead long enough now that he falls into the category of history of philosophy. And I would just like to encourage students who will be back next year to think about reasons and persons and write a good paper and submit it for the History of Philosophy Prize. Okay, so I'm now going to hand things over to our colleague Mitzi Lee, who is, among other things, our Director of Graduate. And we'll have the same basic format here. We have some degrees to grant, and for those who are present here, we hope that you'll speak up a little bit so we can wave and smile and clap and that sort of thing. And then we do also have, for master's students who wrote theses, PhD students who wrote dissertations, I think we'll ask the students to say, a little bit about their work. The undergraduates, I think, set an excellent example for speaking clearly and concisely about their projects, and we'll see whether the graduate students will be able to keep pace or whether we have turned them into the long-winded speakers that they are. And then we have some prizes to announce for some of the graduate students. Mitzi will do some of those, and then toward the end, I'll introduce our colleague Graham Audie to do the final two prizes. So Mitzi, you want to take it from here?
Thank you, David. So we now turn to the graduate students in philosophy who graduated last year and this year. We have a 2-year MA program. We have a 5-year BAM program that combines the BA and the MA. And finally, we have a 5+ year PhD program. All students did a ton of high-level coursework, lots of research and writing, including a thesis or dissertation, as well as teaching. We are really proud of our graduate students and are thrilled to celebrate their work and their achievements with them today. So before I get started, do you want to unmute and just clap for all of the graduate students? Okay, so last year we had 3 students who completed the MA. You can, if you click on the program in the chat, you'll see that there were virtual tributes that were made to the students last year. So I'll just let you click through to those. They were Roger Conero, Richard Fife, and Julia Orr. This year we have 6 who have completed or will complete the MA degree by the summer. Thomas Bond, who is a continuing PhD student. Kieran Britt. Now, Graham Audi, will you please introduce Kieran?
Yes, it's a real pleasure to introduce Kieran, who's one of the most extraordinary students I've ever had, actually. He came to me 3 or 4 years ago. He didn't even know me, but he came into my office and he said, I want to be a philosopher. Specifically, I want to be a logician. Can you tell me how to do that? And I was slightly sort of taken aback, but I gave him the best advice I could muster. And now he's on his way to Princeton to become a philosopher and a logician in full. So congratulations, Kieran. His thesis, which he'll tell you a little bit about, is on the normativity of the epistemic, of the normativity of logic.
So Kieran, could you tell us a little bit about your thesis? Just a couple sentences.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Graham. Yeah, so my thesis is on the normativity of logic, which there's this, basically the idea is that there's an intuitive thought that you might think that facts about logic and what propositions entail others can set standards for what you ought to believe or how you ought to reason. And I'm investigating that, arguing that logic is normative in a very robust sense for both belief and reasoning, and investigating what that means for the norms of logic in being seated in our overall theories of the epistemic. So that's my project.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Kieran. Let's see, Jake Hartman. He did the non-thesis MA option, which means that he took a lot of coursework while he was here. Jake, can you introduce yourself and maybe tell us what your favorite philosophical project was while you were here?
Looks like he doesn't have access to a mic. He posted something in the chat. Hi, Jake. Congratulations.
Okay, congratulations, Jake. Let's see, Quinn Herman, who I think is not here, wrote a thesis with Alistair Norcross and plans to defend in the summer. Jada Taylor is writing a thesis with Matthias Stoip and plans to defend in the summer. Matthias, do you want to introduce Jada?
Yes, I'm delighted to introduce Jada Taylor. She is a student in our combined BA-MA program, and her MA thesis is on a topic in epistemology. She has taken a seminar on reasoning with Julia Staffel, an upper level course, a seminar and an independent study in epistemology with me. And I think she is now on solid grounds if she thinks of herself as an epistemologist. And I'd say she is now already an excellent epistemologist. It's been a pleasure working with you, Jada, and why don't you tell us briefly what your thesis is about?
Hi, that's me again. Sorry if there's background noise. There's an air conditioner or something right through this wall. But the title of my thesis is Rational Dogmatism, and I'm defending the view that it can be both instrumentally and epistemically rational to commit to a dogmatic traditional religion.
Wonderful.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Jada. Okay, Henry Wang is also a graduate from our BAMA program. He completed an MA thesis, which originally started with work with the former visitor to the Center for Western Civilization, William B. Allen, and was completed this spring with Dawn Bailey. Henry, can you tell us the title of your thesis and the topic?
My title of my thesis is same virtue, but different Montesquieu, focusing on discussing how, even though we live in a society in which we don't need virtue for it to function properly, but it's only having virtue that could take us all forward. And I don't want to bore you with the details, but that's basically the idea.
Excellent.
Congratulations,
Henry.
Thank you.
Okay, now moving on to our PhD students. Last year, 7 PhD students graduated from our program. They include Mark Baseflug, who wrote a dissertation in medieval and early modern epistemology with Bob Pasnow. Philip Choi, who wrote a dissertation in medieval epistemology with Bob Pasnow. Anthony Kelly, who wrote a dissertation on well-being and alienation with Chris Heathwood. And I'm going to go through all of them and then stop with Zach. Caleb Picard, who wrote a dissertation in applied ethics with David Boonen. Joe Wilson, who wrote a dissertation in philosophy of science with Carol Cleland, and Alex Wolfroot, who wrote a dissertation on conceptual issues in sports and games with Alistair Norcross. And then finally, Zach Kapakin. Let's see, Graham, would you please introduce Zach?
Yes, it's a real pleasure again to introduce Zach, and it was a great pleasure to work with him. Zach came to me a few years ago. Unfortunately, his preferred supervisor left the program, and so he was left with me. But it actually turned out to be a good fit because Zach is interested in organic wholes and parts like I am, and he wrote a terrific thesis on that, which you'll say a few sentences about.
Thank you, Graham. So since there's no other people from my class, does that mean I get all of their time too to talk about my thesis? I'm just kidding. I'll go very quickly. So my dissertation as a whole was composed of 5 different papers. That was the intersection of ethical reasoning and the metaphysics and epistemology of value. And so I challenged a prominent methodology for reasoning about value that's used in applied ethics a lot. And I argued that the principles it relies on generate contradictions, and that just in general, the methodology is too ambitious and too strong. So I ended up defending a kind of more modest version. And I argue that it's more relevantly similar to the same kind of type of reasoning that's used in traditional scientific experimentation. Yeah, I very much appreciate Graham and the department and all of my committee and all of the students that I've gotten to learn from too, for providing me all of these background conditions in which I was able to kind of conceive of and develop this project. So thank you, everyone.
Congratulations, Zach.
Congratulations.
Okay. This year, we have 7 PhD students who have completed the PhD program. The first is Chris Dengler. Iskra, would you please introduce Chris?
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Dengler, who wrote a very interesting and original thesis on the role of virtue in evaluating artworks. So if you think about the following, for instance, why it is that we value an original painting more than we value a copy of it or a forgery? It doesn't really look like you can tell why by just looking at the painting, because they're identical. And Chris had a very interesting idea having to do with virtue about how to solve that problem. Chris?
Oh, is this where I jump in?
Yes, this is where you jump in.
Yeah, the notion was that though the emergent properties of the artworks themselves don't seem to be any different in between a perfect copy and the original, the virtue intended, or the virtue employed by the original artist does carry a lot of weight with that. And that's what we look for in an original versus, say, a forgery, where the copycat is simply trying to pretend that they have such virtue or to create work that looks as if it has the same virtue when in fact it does not.
Very good. I would add also that Chris got a teaching award, the Teaching Appreciation Award, and I also had him give a guest lecture in my class, and the undergraduate students really enjoyed it, and they commented that Chris should have a podcast because he sounded so well giving a lecture with all of the fancy equipment that you can see there on the screen.
I have a dad who does sound stuff. I lucked out in that regard, but just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone, or to everyone, especially Iskra, of course. All of your help and encouragement and support has meant so much. And of course, it's been a great honor winning said award. So thank you very much.
Congratulations, Chris.
Congratulations.
Okay, next, SAM Director, David Boonin, would you please introduce SAM?
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure. First, I should make a quick announcement, I think. So in deference to my executive committee, which seems to have weighed in the chat, I'm going to retract my executive order, and we'll let Parfit wait another year or two before he becomes eligible for subject in the History of Philosophy Prize. Yeah, so I was super lucky with dissertations that I was involved in over the last couple of years. So just by way of quick background, a few years back, I taught a graduate seminar on a sort of series of issues having to do with sexual consent. And SAM Director was a student in that class. And Alex Lloyd, who, as I recall, had already finished her coursework, audited the class. And they were both super engaged contributors to class discussion. It was a great class, but I think it's really hard for me to picture how it would have gone if Sam and Alex hadn't been students in that class. And then both of them went on to write dissertations with me, in each case of the multi-paper format. So they were working on kind of a set of problems. And in each case, they found something from the sexual consent class to anchor part of their discussion, but then found ways to go beyond into other stuff that I hadn't previously thought about. And it was really rewarding working with both of them. But I'm starting here with Sam, and then Alex, I think, is next. So Sam wrote a paper, Sam wrote a multi-paper dissertation that was on a variety of issues of consent, some of which involved sexual consent, but others didn't, but all involved kind of impairments of one sort or another. And I'll turn it over to him to say a little bit more about that.
Thanks, David. My dissertation was just 5 separate papers on the theme of consent and cognitive impairment. And it was just testing whether people who have certain extreme impairments can give valid consent to either medical scenarios or, in some cases, sexual scenarios. And those impairments were dementia, intoxication, anorexia, bipolar disorder, and being subject to a framing effect. And yeah, Alistair said thank you to Dr. Dementia. Yeah, I just want to thank David so much for all of his help over the years. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Congratulations, Sam. And I should have said it was an excellent dissertation. Thanks.
Congratulations, Sam. Next is Alex Lloyd, and David, you began introducing Alex too, but now you can finish introducing her.
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Yeah, so like I said, I mean, I've had student audit classes on and off over the years, but I've never had a student audit and then still be like super engaged and talking more than, you know, many of the other students there to get credit and so forth, and gave me a lot to think about. Both in the context of the sexual consent stuff, but also she had already developed an interest in racial profiling, which became one of the parts of her dissertation thesis, partly engaging with stuff that I had written about earlier. And so, again, as with Sam, I just felt so lucky to have her in the class, and then to get to go on and work with her on a dissertation, which also turned out extremely well. And again, this was a multi-paper dissertation, so distinct papers on distinct topics, but they were sort of tied together by a theme about the intersection between ethics and epistemology. And I'll let Alex explain that a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, my dissertation was 4 papers at the intersection, like you said, of ethics and epistemology, where I argue that outright belief, as opposed to mere high credence, plays an important moral role across a variety of domains. So like David mentioned, racial profiling, sexual consent in the Me Too movement. And then I also engage with sort of a theory in epistemology called moral encroachment. So yeah, thank you so much to David for being an amazing advisor, and also a shout out to Julia Staffel and Brian Talbot for also putting up with me, constantly sending them lots and lots of drafts of my papers. So I wouldn't have been able to do it without all of you guys. Thanks.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Alex. Okay, oops. Let's see. Next is Bodhi Melnitzer. Let's see, Graham Audie, will you please introduce Bodhi?
Yes, it's a great pleasure. Am I unmuted? Yeah, it's a great pleasure to introduce Bodhi. I was the graduate admissions chair actually in the same year that Bodhi came to Boulder, at which he was made the offer at Boulder. So I got to know him early on. He had a really interesting clutch of letters. I won't go into the details because I might embarrass one or other of us, but he had a really interesting clutch of letters, and I've been extremely fortunate with the graduate students that have gravitated to me over the last 40 some years, and Bodhi is no exception to that. He's been a terrific student. He's also probably one of the most contentious students I've ever had. I don't think Bodhi and I have ever agreed on a single philosophical or non-philosophical thesis. I don't think, I mean, Bodhi might be able to correct me there, but we were always debating long and hard about almost everything, including the value of various different kinds of music. We have a substantial chasm between us on that issue. But so Bodhi, if you can tell us a little bit about your thesis, which is what's wrong with adaptive preferences.
I thought I won you over with the thesis, or at least came close on a few points. Did you win me over?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we can talk about that later.
Okay.
You want to come back and write one more dissertation?
Yeah, my God, I feel bad. You know, so many of you have. This is like the third time you're going to hear the summary. So I did a dissertation on adaptive preference. Those are preferences for things we can get because we can get them, and against what we can't because we can't. Philosophers are interested in these preferences because, well, they seem to many to be defective in certain ways, and their satisfaction doesn't seem to confer well-being in the way that normal preferences do. So they're maybe putative counterexamples to prominent views of well-being and how we should, what type of social policy we should pursue. And I gave a theory of adaptive preference. I argued that adaptive preferences are, I gave a theory of adaptive preferences and kind of their irrationality. I argued that adaptive preferences are preferences formed for the wrong kind of reason. So wrong kinds of reasons are reasons that don't speak to the content of the preference itself. And, you know, so that can maybe explain their defectiveness. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank my folks. Again, they've been so loving and supportive. I really want to thank the department. You all have been tremendously generous. It's been an inspiring place to be. I came in when there was a lot of turmoil, but it's really been a wonderful place and with a lot of special people. And I should specifically thank Graham, whose help has been, well, I can't put in the words, and Iskra and Mike have helped me a lot, the people who sat on my dissertation. And yeah, it's just been a wonderful place to become a philosopher. Or not to, well, not, David says I already was a philosopher, but to become a good philosopher, can I say that? You granted me a PhD, so I feel like I can say that now.
Yes, you can. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
And if the next place you go also seems to be in turmoil, you might start wondering whether you're the cause of the turmoil and not just the perceiver. But it was great having you in the program. Yeah, so sorry, who's up next? Mitzi, I lost track.
Oh, yes. Carrying on, Michael Seckman wrote a dissertation in the area of philosophy of cognitive science entitled Attitudes, Memory Systems Pluralism with Rob Rupert. I don't think he's here. Maggie Taylor wrote a dissertation in the area of bioethics entitled The Harm Threshold, Parental Duty and Pediatric Healthcare Decision-Making with Iskra Faleva and David Boonin. And Lisa Thomas Smith, finally, oh no, I want Iskra to introduce her. So Iskra, could you introduce Lisa?
Yes, so I'm delighted to introduce Lisa Thomas Smith. Lisa actually had a different career before she came to us and did her PhD in philosophy. And, you know, she was making good money and everything seemed to be going well from everyone else's point of view, but she just wanted more out of life. Against the recommendations and advice of people close to her, she decided to pursue a PhD in philosophy. So you can tell from that she's a very independent mind and thinker, and she's someone who marches to her own drum. And that was on display while she worked on her dissertation. She wrote a very original dissertation on the role of habit in moral life. It was interdisciplinary, and Lisa, in fact, got a dual philosophy and cognitive science degree. And I'm glad that in a way we're coming full circle, because actually the topic of Lisa's dissertation was very close to the topic of our commencement speakers talk. Remember the running example that Dr. Anne Hunt gave? Well, Lisa was thinking something very similar, that, you know, if you wanted to become a better person, the best thing to do might not be to somehow pick some kind of far away goal, but to focus on improving your habits here and now and doing it gradually and little by little. And she had just sort of noticed that very often in moral life, whether we act well or badly, it's not, the explanation is not so much sort of related to big virtues and vices that we have, but just related to the habits that we have. What are we accustomed to do on a day-to-day basis? And so Lisa wrote a dissertation called In Praise of Habit. Lisa?
Thanks, Iskra. So my dissertation is an interdisciplinary project, as Iskra said. It leans heavily on psychology and social psychology and philosophy to make this claim that morality is not possible without habit. So traditionally, philosophers have held that moral action is due to knowledge and reflection and introspection. Essentially, if we know better, then we'll do better. And my claim is that that is false. So due to multiple limitations on the human cognitive faculty, like mental fatigue and mental error, and especially limited attention, I argue that the kind of constant focus on moral matters that would be required if the traditional theories were correct is just impossible. So most of our daily activities, because of all of that cognitive stuff, including our moral activity, is automatic and habitual rather than reflective. So we are indeed creatures of habit, and we need to respect that. So the widely accepted assumptions that, one, our actions should actually be morally good, and two, that Hume was correct and we can't be required to do that which we are incapable of doing, then I argue that habits must be morally good if we are to consistently do the right thing.
Congratulations. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Very good. Congratulations. And I just want to add that Lisa is also a very good teacher, and she won the Graduate Student Teaching Excellence Award in 2018, 2019, and her student evaluation scores are very high as well.
Thanks.
Lisa, your dad would be so proud of you.
Thank you.
We all are.
We are.
Congratulations, Lisa.
Congratulations. So Mitzi, am I right that now we're moving on to the prizes?
That's right. Should I just
Okay.
keep on going?
Yeah, so Graham has introduced the gents and the stall, but I think you were going to do the others. So why don't you follow the same process, names, and if people are here, hopefully they can zoom in and chat briefly, and then I'll hand things over to Graham, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. The Catherine Jacob Lamont Scholarship, which is $1,000, goes to Paige Massey for her work with the Minorities in Philosophy group and other contributions to the life of the department. She's not here, but congratulations, Paige. And then I'm going to skip ahead to the teaching awards. The department awards teaching prizes each year to graduate students and are intended to, these are intended to recognize outstanding teaching of undergraduates in the philosophy department. They are named for two emeritus philosophy professors, Professor Claudia Mills and Professor Wes Morstan, in honor of their own outstanding contributions to undergraduate teaching during their own careers. So first, the Mills Teaching Award, awarded each year for the to the best TA. Last year, it was awarded to Thomas Bond. He's not here. This year, the Mills Teaching Award for Best TA is being awarded to two grad students because we couldn't decide who was better, and we thought both were really great. First, Dawn Jacob, and then Megan Kitts. I want to ask each of you to say something about what you taught this year, and maybe, something about your teaching, starting with Dawn.
Hello, thanks so much. And yeah, so I guess this past year I was teaching for philosophy of race, and then also before that teaching or TAing for intro ethics with the awards namee, is that the right term? The person the award is named for, Claudia Mills, which was really a great opportunity. I mean, it's, not only to see someone bring, excellence and expertise into the classroom, but I don't think I've ever seen someone bring so much heart into the classroom. So that was a really great experience to get to teach with her. And so, yeah, so I appreciate the people I've been able to learn from and all the department support for teaching. I'll mention especially, even if Brian Talbot hasn't been mentioned enough, Brian, the work you do helping us all become better teachers is really phenomenal, and we appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Congratulations, Dawn.
Never mentioned Brian enough. No need to apologize.
And then Megan Kitts.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This past year I TA'd for Intro to Ethics and for Philosophy to Gender, and I just wanted to thank everyone for their support in helping me get better, and yet another shout out to Brian for helping us manage a really impossible semester in the fall. And yeah, thank you to undergrads, and particularly for my students for putting up with recitations that had meows for the full 50 minutes. So thank you.
Congratulations, Megan. Good job. Thank you for everything you've done. Let's see. The Morstan Teaching Award is given to the best GPTI. Last year, the award was given to Maggie Taylor, who's also graduating, but she's not here today. This year, the Morstan Teaching Award for Best GPTI is being awarded to Eric Reeson. Eric, could you tell us what you taught in the past couple years, and maybe say a few words about what it's been like teaching for you?
Yeah, sure. So I taught two sections of bioethics, one over the summer and then one over a condensed January term. And then right now I'm teaching an Ethics of Information Technologies course. Zach Kopakin and I are actually developing an Ethics of AI course that hopefully will be running fall of 2, so that's pretty exciting. I want to thank both Julia and Brian for all their amazing work helping the grad students become better teachers. Brian running all the workshops, Julia doing all the evaluations. I know it's a ton of work, and before we had you two in the department, let's just say you're a great help. So thank you so much. Also, thank you to the graduate students. I got to watch a lot of our graduate teachers in my role this year as lead GPTI, and I saw some amazing teaching going on. This was a really tough year for students and teachers. And so I think our graduate student teachers did a really good job kind of keeping the community that we have and even building on that community. Finally, I want to thank my wife and my young son. My young 3-year-old son didn't believe I was a teacher. And then I told him I won this award. And now I think he's starting to believe that I actually am a teacher. So thank you to both of them for putting up with it, for putting up with me and my teaching. So thanks.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. That's great. Let's see, is that it, Mitzi, besides this?
That's it for me. So over to Graham Oddie then.
Great. So yeah, I'm very happy to turn things over to my colleague, Graham, who's also the director of our Center for Values and Social Policy. And if you don't mind indulging me for just a moment, I know we all have a bit of Zoom fatigue probably at this point, but I'd like to say a few words about Graham before he announces the final 2 prizes. Graham's going to be retiring at the end of this fall. So this is his last commencement ceremony with us as an official member of the department, although hopefully like other Graham, he'll come back in future years. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to say a few words about Graham before he presents the last 2 prizes. So I first met Graham in 1997 when I was a candidate for a position here and he was the chair of the department. I'd grown up in Boulder. I love it here. So this was really my dream job. And I still remember the day when Graham called me to tell me that I'd gotten the position. So he told me that I'd gotten the job. He told me how much CU was offering to pay me. And I immediately said yes to the offer. And I said goodbye so I could call my parents and tell them that I'd gotten the job and that I was moving home. Now, if you know anything at all about the art of negotiation, you probably know that you're not supposed to say yes to the first offer that they make you. But I was really too excited to think about any of that. Fortunately for me, Graham nonetheless took it upon himself to go to the college and put in the work of trying to negotiate a better offer for me on my behalf. That was the first time I knew, it certainly wasn't the last, that this wasn't just a nice guy with a charming New Zealand accent. This was a consummate department leader who carefully looked out for his colleagues. And indeed, I want to say virtually everything I ever learned about how to be a department chair, I learned from watching Graham do it during my first several years in the department. He was always thoughtful, thorough, fair, good-natured, always managed to make department meetings as pleasurable as they could be, which is not necessarily to say particularly pleasurable. And another thing I clearly remember is the day when he announced that he'd been asked to put his name in for the associate dean position. And he told us at a meeting that if it was offered to him, he might well accept it and step down as department chair. Now, I'm a philosopher, so I'm used to entertaining highly implausible propositions. But the idea of our department getting on without Graham as chair, really, I remember at the time, it just sort of struck me as inconceivable. And I remember sort of thinking like, well, maybe we'll just have to get rid of the department if he stepped down as chair. And I want to just add, even after all these years, I do still feel like I still feel whenever I walk into the room for a department meeting, I still have this nagging feeling that Graham should be the one sitting at the head of the table. He's also an outstanding and prolific philosopher. I'm not going to take the time here to go over the highlights of the CV, but I do want to say one thing I particularly admire about him as a philosopher is the true breadth, not just of his interests, but really of his strengths, spanning from metaphysics and epistemology to metaethics and ethics and to aesthetics. I've also gotten to watch him teach, and I can tell you from that, he's just as skilled at commanding a classroom as he was at running a department meeting. And so really his students in our department have been fortunate to have him here for as long as we've been able to have him. So we're still trying to recover from the blow of losing 1 Graham last year and not looking forward to having to deal with losing another at the end of this year. but we do have him for one more semester. But as I said, since this is his last commencement with us in an official capacity, I wanted to say a few extra words before I now introduce him so that he can play an official role in this last commencement and present the final 2 graduate student prizes. So Graham.
Oh, thank you very much, David, for those very kind words.
You're here.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting and worthwhile 25 years here. I remember about 10 years ago when my first PhD student, Roy Parrott, retired from his position as professor at the University of Hawaii. I thought, that's weird. I mean, how many of my students have to retire before I do? But it still didn't encourage me to think about retiring at the time. I just thought that's very weird. And then another couple more of my graduate students retired. So I thought maybe it's time to think about it too. But I want to thank David and the rest of the department for a wonderful 25 years here. And I won't say too much more, else I might burst into tears. So anyway, the focus should now change back to Sam, Dr. Sam Director, who has won 2 more prizes today. And I think I say a little bit about both the prizes, and I think then Sam can say a little bit about what he did for them. But the 2 prizes are the Jentsch Prize, which is given in memory of Gus Jentsch, who was a PhD student in philosophy at CU in the late 1960s and died young of Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it is awarded for the best graduate student paper of the year. And Sam won this year's prize for his paper of blood transfusions and feeding tubes, anorexia nervosa and consent, which I think was part of his PhD thesis. And he is also the winner of the Stahl Prize. It's given in memory of Professor Gary Stahl, who taught at CU from 62 to 96. And he was here when I first came here in 94. And he very graciously gave me his office when I came here. So I feel a great fondness for Gary. He was a wonderful man. But the prize recognizes a graduate student who has made a significant contribution toward bringing the discipline of philosophy to bear on some demanding and crucial human problem. And so Sam was awarded it this year for bringing the techniques of philosophical reasoning to bear on the problem of political polarization through his work over the past 3.5 years as the head coach of speech and debate at Colorado Christian University. So Sam, if you would like to say a couple of words before we wrap this all up.
Sure, thanks, Graham. What do you want me to say? Or just anything?
Yeah, you could say what a wonderful contribution I made to your education or something along those lines. That would be.
Yeah, well, thank you, Graham, for all the contributions you've made to my education. I do remember once going to an undergrad philosophy club talk you were giving because I wanted the free pizza, but I got to stay and enjoy a very good talk about, I think, like Fichte's paradox or something like that. But yeah, thanks so much to the department for both of these prizes, and I'm really honored to receive them.
Thank you very much, Sam. So I hand it back to David, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks again, Graham, and congratulations, Sam. Okay, well, maybe I should say at this point, congratulations to everybody for staying on Zoom so long. As I said, I know this has been, it's a draining year, draining experience, but I'm glad we were able to take the time to recognize everyone in keeping with the plan of trying as much as possible to replicate what we would do if we were meeting in person. The tradition is that the chair makes some concluding remarks, and so I'm going to do that now. All right, so here we go. So as our students know quite well by now, philosophy papers are often divided into 2 parts: the presentation of an argument, followed by consideration of some objections that can be raised against it. So too with my welcome and closing remarks. So having already explained what I think is good about the study of philosophy, I'd like to conclude by considering 2 objections. First, a critic of the position I've taken here today might point out that people have all sorts of inclinations and that it isn't always good to encourage them to be good at developing them. So a kleptomaniac, for example, has an inclination to steal things. That doesn't mean we should teach them to be a good thief rather than a bad thief. Why do we say that we should teach people to be a good philosopher rather than a... But there's an important difference between the disposition to steal things and the disposition to seek answers to the kinds of fundamental questions that philosophers investigate. Kleptomania is an aberration, a disorder. The inclination to wonder about philosophical problems, by contrast, is a central feature of human nature. Human beings are naturally philosophical animals. My wife is a preschool teacher, and from her experiences alone, I can assure you that before so many of them have it drummed out of them when they get older, virtually every young child is a natural born philosopher. Young children are obsessed with issues of fairness. Their favorite question is why? And here are just a few examples of some of the many things that my wife's preschoolers have said over the years. One little boy once asked my wife why you can get a heart transplant, but you can't get a head transplant. That's a great philosophical question. A little girl was once watching a group of kids playing zombie, where one zombie would infect others by touching them, turning them into zombies, when she suddenly turned around and asked, wait a minute, how did there get to be the first zombie? Another girl was being bothered by a child who was trying to play with her while she was eating her lunch. She turned to the child and said, you can't just play with me, I'm not a toy. And you can tell I'm not a toy because, and then a confused frown came across her face and she descended into puzzled silence. And a great debate once spontaneously broke out among her students over this fundamental question. Is Chuck E. Cheese a restaurant that has games, or is it an arcade that has food? If that isn't a philosophical conundrum worthy of Socrates, I honestly don't know what is. A second objection to my argument maintains that by appealing to the claim that a philosophy degree is good because it helps our students become good philosophers rather than bad philosophers, I've simply reverted to the instrumental approach to answering the question that I said I was rejecting at the outset. After all, a critic might say, the more you master an activity, the better it feels to engage in it. And so my argument might seem to boil down to the claim that majoring in philosophy is good because it will make you feel good after all. Here's why I think this is a mistake. I teach courses in the area of applied ethics. And in my introductory courses, I often have students come up to me after a class session and say something like this. I can't find the mistake in the argument about abortion you were talking about today, but I know the argument must be wrong because I don't agree with its conclusion. Okay? Now, some students aren't really bothered by this tension between what they believe on the one hand and what an apparently sound argument seems to show them to be true on the other. They simply note the inconsistency in how things appear to them, and they get on with their lives. These students seem to be happy. But other students are genuinely troubled by the experience. They find the results of thinking philosophically to be deeply distressing, disturbing, depressing. These are the ones who go on to become philosophy majors. They probe these questions not because doing so makes them feel better, but simply because they recognize that these are questions that demand to be probed. When I was a sophomore in college and starting to consider majoring in philosophy myself, I asked my first philosophy professor whether he ever thought that the entire discipline is nothing but a bunch of baloney. I still remember his response. He said with a smile, oh yes, all the time, but it's such good tasting baloney. Now, when I was a sophomore in college, that answer was good enough for me. But if a student who did well in one of my classes and who felt pulled in the direction of majoring in philosophy were to ask me the same question today, I think I would revise the answer in two ways. First, the bologna would have to be vegan and gluten-free. But second, and more importantly, I would tell that student what I would now like to tell all of the students who are gathered here today to celebrate this very special transition. It's not so much that the philosophical enterprise makes for such good tasting bologna, but that whether you like it or not, you and I are philosophers. And whether we enjoy the taste or not, we can't live the best lives we can live without gorging ourselves on it. So congratulations once more to students, Thanks again once more to the parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friendly neighbors, extended network. Students get to this point. And one final time, if people want to unmute, a round of applause for all of our graduates. Heard. Congratulations. Thanks everybody for coming. And as I said before, I know Zoom isn't the ideal format, but it was nice to get to see some. And I hope some people now go and jump in their nearby swimming pools. All right, take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Claim that is made by BDS that Israel is an apartheid